morning, and welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. My co-host today is Kelly De La Torre, the founder and CEO of Rapid Tech Transit, a company that focuses on getting technology to market based here in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me.
You know, Kelly, we always have such fun talking about these energy issues in our Energy 101 segment. But today, you know, we have one of the foremost leaders and foremost thought leaders in the new energy sector today. And I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we have Jigar Shah, who's an entrepreneur and a well-known visionary in the energy industry, and we're going to get to the bottom of that. Like, how did he start out in this industry, and explain to people sort of why he's considered such a visionary.
Absolutely. Well, Jigar, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Jigar, you have such a rich history from the founding of Sun Edison all the way to what you're doing now. Can you give us a little bit of background on how that all came together?
Sure. I, caught the bug around renewable energy at a young age. And through the short jobs that I had in the wind industry and then in the solar industry, and then I did alternative fuel vehicles with Department of Energy, the same thing kept coming over and over again, which was that these clean technologies cost more upfront, but have less operating expenses, right? So if you have an electric vehicle, the fuel costs are less, or if you have a solar panel, then the fuel is free after you pay for the upfront cost. And so the biggest problem that customers had was that they didn't really want to pay the upfront cost for the technology. And so a lot of my expertise and my passion is trying to figure out how to resolve that upfront cost for people.
Yeah, and that's what I really love about your work is that you're, in my opinion, you're more of a doer. Like, let's look at what these barriers are and fix them, as opposed to let's come together and identify these barriers and then leave because we've identified these barriers and then nothing happens. Like, you're actually you're always motivated to find out what happens. And for example, the PPA model that or the power purchase agreement model that you developed for Sun Edison, can you talk a little bit about that and explain sort of in layman's terms? Because I think people see solar going up and they see Kohl's and Walmart putting up solar, but I don't know if people really understand the business mechanism behind that.
Yeah, I just talked to a famous entrepreneur who I won't mention from the Colorado area that made his money in natural foods. And he was saying to me, Jigar, is that solar stuff really cost effective? There's no way it's really cost effective. And I was telling him, I was like, Walmart and Kohl's would not be rolling this out nationwide if this thing wasn't cost effective, right? I mean, the thing that's happened is that the reason these guys are initially going solar is partially for bragging rights. They're saying, look, if I can get solar at the same cost as my power from the utility company, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah.
Right? But the other reason they're doing it is because they can't stand the roller coaster ride that they're on.
Right.
Since 2000, the electricity rates for them have gone up at 4 to 5% a year. And for many of those people, that's above inflation. And so they're saying, look, this is eating into my profits. And if you're a nonprofit, this is eating into the services that you provide because your donors aren't increasing the amount of money they're giving to you by more than inflation every year. And so a lot of these folks really just want price predictability. And there's really no other way to do it. If you put a natural gas engine in your backyard or a diesel generator, it's whatever the cost of natural gas or diesel is that week. And remember, in 2008, natural gas prices were expensive. Now they're cheap, and we'll see where they end up. With solar, you can actually lock in these prices for the next 20 years because I know exactly what the system's going to cost up front, and I know that the maintenance is very low and the fuel is free. And so as long as the numbers pencil, which is the amount that they pay me every month for the next 20 years, and that amount of money is enough to pay off the beginning investment with a rate of return for that investor, then the math works. And that's exactly what the power purchase agreement model is.
So if the PPA, obviously the PPA is successful and made Sun Edison hugely successful, but how does that differ from what others are doing, like a Bright Source or a Solar City or those guys? How is it different, and what's going on with this? I mean, I think 1 minute it's one step forward and 2 steps back, and then 3 steps forward and 1 step back, and it seems like it's just this constant dance of how to be successful in solar.
Yeah, and so Sun Edison was the first company to really commercialize the power purchase agreement. So Bright Source, Solar City, all these companies copied the model and are now innovating across that spectrum, which is very exciting to me. I mean, imitation is the best form of flattery, and so I love the fact that there's 500 companies now doing power purchase agreements, everyone from utility scale solar like BrightSource to residential scale solar like SolarCity. So I think it's all great. The challenge is that right now the solar industry has the facts, which is, which we can talk about, and then it has the media, right? And the media, what you find, likes to jump on press releases back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I like to deal just in the pure facts, right? When you look at the pure facts, 50% of all the electricity added to the U.S. grid this year was renewable energy. Right, and that's been the case for the past 6 years. So it's not a most recent trend under Obama. It was the same under Bush, right? The next thing is the solar industry as a whole has actually had its subsidies go down by roughly 50% in the last 2 years, and the industry has actually doubled. So the industry is doing fine. It's figured out how to cut its costs and figured out how to grow even in the face of reducing subsidies. And in fact, the industry wants its subsidies to be reduced because the whole concept of subsidies was a social compact. We said, if you provide us these subsidies, we're going to be able to get to scale. If we get to scale, our costs will come down and we won't need the subsidies anymore. Today, we're about 5 years into the subsidy process, right? And we're now at a point where we can actually get rid of our subsidies by 2017. And that's what we're telling all the politicians in the world is we're saying, please get rid of our subsidies by 2017 because we won't need them. And in fact, the subsidies are now holding us back because certain subsidies are, for instance, tax subsidies. And if you don't pay enough taxes to the federal government or you don't have the right circumstances, you can't use those tax credits. So even if you passionately want to invest, these tax credits are actually in the way for some investors. So we're marching our way down to being subsidy-free by 2017, which of course the oil, gas, and coal industry can't seem to do for themselves.
Right, right.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. We've had on the show Nancy Fund with DBL Investors who did the study, What Would Jefferson Do? And talked about how embedded all of these subsidies are. And it started with the timber industry, coal industry, oil and gas. So how do we level the playing field? And actually, can you give a little bit of background on those subsidies first, I guess?
Sure. So the problem with the oil and gas industry, the coal industry is a little bit different. Their subsidies are mostly provided by subsidies to mine coal on federal land, right? They don't pay their fair share to the federal government for what they mine out of the land. But for the oil and gas industry, the problem with that industry is it's risky. Right? No matter how much geology you have, you could still drill a dry hole. Yeah. Right? So the federal government said, well, that risk is so high that people aren't going to drill unless we mitigate that for them. So the federal government provides what they call the intangible drilling credit. And that allows you to drill a dry hole and pay your customers, your investors, back in tax credits. So it's a win-win proposition. You don't lose any money if you drill a dry hole. Yes, you lose the use of your money, and so you get like maybe a negative 3% return because you get the tax credits back over time. But if you drill successfully oil and gas, you get a 20% rate of return. Now, you can imagine if you lost all of your money if you drilled a dry hole, and you got only a 20% return if you hit oil and gas, most people wouldn't invest. They'd say, well, 20% isn't enough for me to take all that risk. I want a 40% return if, the alternative is I lose all my money. So the federal government stepped in and said, no, we'll make sure that you get compensated fairly for all that risk you're taking if you drill a dry hole. Now, I don't get that same tax credit in the renewable energy industry. If I work for 6 months to help close a client on solar, and that person decides not to close, I still incurred all those sales and marketing costs, and the federal government's not giving those back to me in tax credits. The way the federal government subsidizes solar is they say, if you successfully close that customer, then we will allow you to take a 30% tax credit on the actual money that you've invested. And as Nancy's study showed, the federal government gets all of that back in the taxes that they receive over that 20-year period. And so, in fact, the tax credit from the federal government, from the taxpayer's point of view, is made whole over that 20 years. And so it's just apples and oranges. My feeling is that now that the oil and gas sector seems to be mature, and they actually have sophisticated tools, they can do without the intangible drilling credit. They just have to drill 100 holes, and maybe 70 of them will hit something and 30 of them won't, but they'll be able to amortize those costs over 100 holes. But right now, they're still begging and pleading to keep their tax credits.
And so how would that look? Because under Nancy's study, it looked like they're really embedded into the tax code. So
They're permanent.
yeah, so how would we go about even addressing that?
Well, I mean, to me, this is not about nitpicking around subsidies, right? To me, this is about what is the future that we want to have. And I think the vast majority of people, from the Walmarts to the Kohl's of the world, have spoken with their checkbooks and said, we want renewable energy, right? So now the question becomes, with all these people who want renewable energy, how do we level the playing field for energy sources? Because today, there is a huge embedded interest for big utility companies to build more generation, more natural gas plants, more coal plants, more nuclear plants, whatever it is that they want. Today, we now have the internet and we have mobile phone technology, which we didn't have 20 years ago. And so we shouldn't be running the grid in the same way that we did in the 1970s.
Yeah,
but we are, right? And so what I mean by that is that the grid today is run fully on the supply side. So if people want more energy, you turn on another generator. But in the future, you can actually shut things off. A lot of people work today. You have a lot of two-income families. They leave stuff on it during the day. If the utilities could shut off all those vampire loads for you by using the Wi-Fi system in your house to just shut things off, you save money because that stuff's been shut off. But they actually can use that to load level the grid.
Right.
Things like refrigerators. Refrigerators are storage. They're thermal storage. You have insulation in there, and they could, when they have extra power, they could make your food about 1 degree cooler. You wouldn't even notice. And then when they have a lack of power, they could shut off your compressor such that the temperature rises in your refrigerator to 1 degree above what you set it at. And if it ever goes above that, it automatically turns on, right? So it keeps your food controlled. But you could actually load level the entire grid in Denver just by being able to control those kinds of loads that you don't really even care about. But if the utility spends $100 million on natural gas power plant, why not spend $100 million on empowering consumers to use their smartphones to be able to more, intelligently use energy instead, right? Well, the reason is because they're not used to that. The average age of a utility employee in the country now is 54 years old. 54 years old. You've been working in this industry for over 30 years. So, you wake up in the morning and say, well, it ain't broke. Why do we need to fix it?
Right.
And my response is, well, because, shoot, we've invented a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
We actually have moved on, we actually have computers now. So, get into the 21st century. But it's a very difficult thing to do in Congress, right? To convince congressmen that, they should vote against their entrenched interests.
Well, and I think that's such an interesting concept, because Kelly and I have talked about this a lot, is there's that barrier from everyone, from the consumer to the legislators out there, that it's hard to get traction in these new energy ideas and concepts and things. And how are we going to get that to move? I mean, I think when we saw Sandy happen, and we still have people without power there. And I know one of the people that works here at ICOSA, her family lives in Long Island. They turned the power on, and 5 houses burned down because they're not ready for it. How do we move that needle to get this more in the daily conversation and how we work?
Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that the solutions exist. Today, we talk about these things as though they're in the future. This year, the solar industry will do $12 to $15 billion of business. 120,000 full-time employees. That's more than the coal mining industry. That's more than the steel and iron industry in the United States. That's more than many industries in the United States, right? So we're no longer a backwater industry. 120,000 people puts us into the top 5% of industries around here. And so now the question becomes, when are people going to treat us like we're a big industry, right? And when are people going to say, oh, solar's here today? Every single week, I get a press release saying another school district has put solar on all their buildings and is saving $12 million over the next 20 years. Every week, right? This is not something that I get once every 6 months. Every mayor in the country is now saying, how do I use green technology to promote economic development in my community? Fort Collins here in Colorado, they're not saying let's attract companies from outside. They're saying, how do we help the businesses that are currently in our city become more sustainable. Right? And that's an economic development tool for that person. They're not doing it because of climate change. They're not doing it because it's something that was sold to them by some liberal radio host.
Right.
This was something that they woke up one morning and said, hey, we need to increase our growth rate in this country, and we're going to start doing this at home. What's available? Well, we can get people to use less water by using water efficiency technologies. We can get people to use less electricity by using advanced lighting solutions that are actually better for your eyes. We can start getting people to use renewable energy that's already cost effective without subsidies. We can start getting people to use advanced transportation technologies that use half the amount of fuel than the existing trucks that they have. And with diesel prices at $4 a gallon today, those things pay themselves off, according to the Cambridge Energy Research Associates, in less than 1.5 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. And Fort Collins, we've talked a lot about Fort Collins also, is that, I mean, that community really came together. And what it shows is that, the consumers, the utility, the city council, everybody came together and they said, this is what we're going to do. And that's what makes it work. And then in the other study by Nancy Fund showed that exactly what you're saying is that it's not a bipartisan issue. It's not like Democrats like clean energy and Republicans don't. Everybody likes clean energy because of job growth. And Governor Christie is a great example of that. And so actually my next question then is, with Hurricane Sandy, do you see an opportunity to really push some of these solutions when they rebuild?
I do, but I think that it's the wrong way of approaching this. So I think that there are a group of people in this country who believe that unless we get the federal government to do this, we have not succeeded. And I don't view this that way. I mean, today, if you talk to the top 10% of people who graduate from college today, every one of them wants to work in this industry. There's not a single one of them that says, I want to start a 50-year career in the electric utility industry. There's not a single one of them, when they have a choice and they got 5 job offers in front of them, they do not want to work for BP or Exxon.
Yeah.
That's why BP and Exxon are spending $100 million at the Colorado School of Mines. It's not because, they think so highly of the Colorado School of Mines, although it's a great school. And that's why the Colorado School of Mines is doing a big sustainability push, because they have all their students saying, I don't want to work in the mining industry, I want to work in the renewable energy industry. And so you're in the situation where they're putting $100 million there because they're desperate to get their brand in front of these kids, because they're saying, if we can just pick off one of these kids, because they know that wherever the smartest people that we're graduating go to work is where the industries are going to be successful. And right now, all the smartest people in our country are going into the renewable energy industry and the sustainability industry. So I know we're going to win. That's not the question. The question becomes, what's the growth agenda for our country? When you listen to our politicians today, and they're all talking about the fiscal cliff and austerity and all these other things, what the Republicans will often say is, part of the way we're going to balance the budget is by getting us back to 4% growth. Well, you're not going to get us to 4% growth by using the same thing that we tried after September 11th, which is just cutting taxes. Right? And look, and I pay a lot of taxes, and so I would like to pay less taxes. So it's not that I'm, in the, please tax me to death movement. Right. But at the same time, I want a growth agenda. I'm like, what are you selling me that's a growth agenda? And they're like, well, oil and gas. That is not a growth agenda.
No. Yeah.
It is not. There are a lot of people there, and I love them. I used to work at BP, and to the extent that those people are drilling more, that's fantastic. If we can find more cost-effective oil, that's great. But the cost of getting oil out of the Bakken Shale in North Dakota is over $60 a barrel, and if oil prices fall below $60, which we all hope they do, because we don't want to keep paying $4 a gallon forever, then all those people are going to be out of a job. That's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Right? And so my feeling is the only growth agenda, the largest wealth creation opportunity on the planet that I know of, the only place that I know that we can invest $1 trillion cost effectively without subsidies is in sustainability. That's the only place that I see that we can actually invest that much money into the United States between now and 2020.
So then, so I was invited to a roundtable last week with Assistant Secretary Danielson of DOE, and he sat us down in this room, and he's like, "What big ideas would you present to Obama in his second term?" So, do you have big ideas that you would present to him that would sort of support innovation and sustainability?
Yeah, I think that the problem is that the big ideas that I have don't sound so big because I haven't done the small things. So, for instance, get the federal government to be green. I'm so sick and tired of the federal government constantly studying itself.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, we have a big old announcement of $7 billion worth of renewable energy on military bases. Get that done.
Yeah.
Who's in charge of making sure that gets done? I don't know that there's anybody in charge of getting that stuff done.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of overworked procurement officers who, God bless them, have 40 things on their desk, and they've got somebody from on high saying, hey, make sure this is the number 41 on your desk. Well, no, if you're a good manager, you got to go in and say, here are the 20 things I'm going to take off your desk so you have time to work on getting this done. I don't think anybody in the administration's doing that. They've got energy efficiency that they could do in all their buildings. Hell, the post office keeps losing money. One of the things that they could do is actually figure out a way to make themselves more energy efficient.
Yeah.
They've got all those trucks. Why aren't they all powered on natural gas right now? They should be. Natural gas is so much cheaper to power those trucks right now than diesel fuel. I think that they could lead by example. And Assistant Secretary Danielson has a lot of the tools within his toolbox to get that done. So that's the first thing I would do. And the estimates is that they already have, through Congress, $160 billion of money approved to do this stuff. In the first 4 years of the Obama administration, they only put $4 billion of that out the door.
Really?
Right? And
Really?
so get to work.
Yeah.
Right? Put out the other $156 billion. That would be a good first step for them. The second thing to do is organize people. I don't need you to pay us off. I don't need you to invest in our companies or any of that stuff. What I need you to do is organize us, right? When you look at Hickenlooper is a conflicted man. He's like, well, I kind of like renewable energy, but actually I'm an oil and gas guy, right? But
Right.
put people together, like have a meeting in Denver and say, well, who are the companies in this area that could scale 10 times faster if anyone in elected office actually cared about them? Right? There's a lot of companies in Denver, for instance, doing green chemicals. You can now clean your office building with green products at a 10% discount to what you're currently using for toxic chemicals, and it reduces your healthcare costs for your company's employees because there are a lot of people right now that are allergic to some of those cleaning products. Right? And so that's an easy thing we could do. And if the mayor would say, hey, we've got a green chemicals agenda, we want to teach all the businesses about green chemicals, it's an easy switch. Procter & Gamble and everybody else makes green chemicals too, so it's not like they're going out of business. And we can make that switch. That's great. He can also say, hey, all new school buses that we buy are going to be natural gas instead of diesel. Right? Those are things that you could do right now, but it requires you to get the right people in the room and actually convene. The government doesn't have to spend a lot of money to get a law firm to offer up their space and to get 50 people in a room to have this conversation at a real transactional level. So I think that's another thing that they could do. The third thing they could do is actually show real leadership internationally. We just came out of the Doha negotiation rounds, and Todd Stern was an embarrassment to all Americans. I can't believe he went up there and basically said nothing. We have, in our country, all of the technologies. We invented them here in Colorado, in MIT, in Stanford, at the University of Illinois. We invented all of the technologies necessary to solve climate change in this country. We just have to export them around the world. We have that ability to export them. What did Todd Stern do? He basically started twiddling his thumbs for 2 weeks, didn't actually promote our growth agenda, didn't promote an alternative where maybe the top 20 OECD countries could get together to do technology sharing together with the rest of the countries in the world. That's something that they could show leadership on. You don't have to pass something through the Senate. I get the fact that the Senate's never going to approve the Kyoto Protocol. But you can at least show leadership on that international stage and say, hey, we're willing to share our technologies around the world and do this. But the Obama administration is always couching themselves. They're always saying, well, we don't want to look like we're too far ahead because we want we want maybe all the people who love oil and gas to love us too. And I was like, look, all the people that I know that love oil and gas also love technology. And they want us to see us move to the 21st century. I thought it was an embarrassment that Mitt Romney and Obama were fighting to see who was the late, Larry Hagman on stage during that debate. They're like, no, I'm the oil man. No, I'm the oil man. I was like, seriously? Dallas went off the air back in the 80s. That was sad.
It was, and I think there's so much that you just talked about that I want to delve deeper into when we come back from break. Kelly, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, this is a great conversation.
Well, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on Driving Force Radio. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio. On today's show, we're doing Energy 101, and as always, Kelly De La Torre of Rapid Tech Transit is my co-host. Welcome back, Kelly.
Thanks, Jan.
You know, we're having such a compelling conversation today about new energies, but also the importance of it on the American economy with the fantastic Jigar Shah.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Jigar.
My pleasure.
So, Jigar, you talked about so many things right before we went to break, and I want to come back to something you said. You know, you said something to the effect of, we are looking at the largest wealth creation opportunity in our lifetime right now, and that it's something like $1 trillion of investment that could go on. Can you talk about that specifically? Because I think people heard that but don't know what that means.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the 1970s, we embarked in a huge research and development mission through the setting up the Department of Energy. We set up a lot of these other R&D programs. Today, all of those investments have borne fruit. We now have advanced technologies to reduce the friction in engines, so we can reduce our fuel usage. We have the ability to use lightweight materials. I mean, the new Boeing Dreamliner is made out of carbon fiber. We can actually make cars out of lightweight material so that they're half the weight, but still the same 5-star crash ratings. So you have the ability to implement these technologies cost effectively at scale. I just don't know where the anger is. I mean, in 1999, I was paying $1 a gallon for gasoline.
Right.
Today, I'm paying $4, and I don't see people pissed off. People's incomes at the middle class and lower middle class levels haven't gone up since 1999. And now energy is cutting a huge swath out of their family budget.
Right.
And so you look at schools, for instance. In schools, when you talk to the U.S. Green Building Council, they believe that they can cut 20% of their electricity usage, natural gas usage, water usage, and waste production and therefore disposal costs without any real investment, just by changing behavioral practices, just making sure that lights are turned off, making sure computers are down. A lot of these computer labs are on all the time. You now have, with the internet and mobile phone technology, the ability to check that remotely. You don't have to send someone into the computer lab every day to check anymore. You can check on your iPhone whether the computer lab's on and just hit a button and shut it off. Right? I mean, that's the kind of technology that we have today. And when I say $1 trillion, $150 billion of it can just be done at federal government facilities over the next 4 years, which of course, because of pork, are sprinkled in every single congressional district in the country. So no one's going to complain if they have all those investments everywhere. And then you've got ports today where you have ships where those ships are producing all of the major particulate emissions in a city. That's why port cities have much higher rates of cancer and other health impacts. You have the ability now to actually make those ships 30% more efficient with technologies that have 2-year paybacks. AkzoNobel, which is a huge company like a Dow or DuPont in Europe, has a low friction paint where you can paint the side of a ship so barnacles don't attach, and it gives it 7 to 9% better fuel economy, because it doesn't have the drag of barnacles attached, right?
Sure.
You have improved propeller design, because now that we have sophisticated computers, you can actually design propellers that are micro-designed such that it really moves the water more efficiently. And those have a 2-year payback. Waste heat recovery systems, where a lot of these engines basically just burn the fuel at 25, 30% efficiency, and all the other heat is just wasted. You can turn that heat back into movable power through a waste heat recovery system. So there's all of these technologies in shipping, in heavy trucks, in personal cars, in electricity production and usage, in natural gas usage. And there's just so many things that we've invented in this country, and we, for some reason, have gotten lazy that we don't seem to want to make deployment of these technologies our #1 priority.
See, it's really interesting because other times that we've talked, you talk about a lack of information, like in the shipping industry. Like when you brought all those people together, they just didn't have the information that they needed. And Melanie Kenderdine, who now runs the MIT Energy Initiative. She had started several years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, the RIPSI, Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, where that's what they did. They took all of these technologies that were actually technologies from other industries, medical industry, everything, and they were trying to pool these as some sort of clearinghouse where if people had patents, they could figure out how to cross-license, and they could also figure out what are the best ways to extract our existing oil reserves, applying old technology to extraction industries. So there's a potential for something like that where you could really raise the profile of the technologies that like you've written about, like 20 years old, these technologies, but we're still not using them.
Yeah, I mean, and so I think education has a huge role to play, but just to be clear about what we're doing in shipping. So we actually, there was an information transparency issue. You couldn't tell what an efficient ship, you couldn't tell the difference between an efficient ship and an inefficient ship.
Okay.
So we basically put a label on every single ship virtually by putting together a database. You could type in the name of the ship and see what the fuel economy was. And now Cargill has decided to use that to exclusively use A, B, and C grade ships, which are the highest efficiency ships in the marketplace. But, you know, I don't think that's enough. And the reason we've been so successful as a movement is because we have people who are donating their time and their passion to our issues everywhere. You know, I mean, in a very polite way, you have to get in people's faces. And you have to say to people, hey, what is it about you that makes you so frickin' lazy? Right? Has it been that like you haven't gone to enough conferences? Like you haven't read enough issues of ICOSA? Like what is it exactly that you sit there and you're so lazy that this technology has been presented to you 12 times and you still haven't moved? I get the fact that it means you have to stand up, print out a goddamn contract, and then actually sign it. I get it. And that's very difficult because it uses a little bit of ink. You know, you might have to replace the ink cartridge in your HP printer. I get it. It's very hard. It's very difficult. Maybe you should get an intern, you know, to help you with doing that stuff. But, you know, I just think that it is amazing to me that we let people go. We let people just, you know, be lazy. People say to me, well, you know, my boiler just crapped out, right? And so I need to get a new boiler. Well, you know, you've been studying this high efficiency boiler for a long time. Yeah, but, you know, the other one was $700 cheaper. We just had a conversation 8 days ago about how that $700 would be saved in fuel savings within 9 months. So what is it about your brain that doesn't let you connect one and one? Well, no, it's because like they say, well, if I do things exactly like my predecessor did it, then I'm never going to get blamed. But no, we need to start blaming them for doing things exactly like their predecessor did. Things need to get a little more uncomfortable around here.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And yeah, that's a really good point, is that the laziness doesn't match up with the economic payoff. Like if you were just a little less lazy, big economic payoff.
People make bad decisions all the time. It's extraordinary how many bad decisions people make just because they're lazy. They're just like, well, I'm going to keep doing it. It's the same reason people keep smoking. It's not because, like, you know, there hasn't been 800 commercials on TV saying, hey, you know, here's this patch and here's this thing and here's this whatever. Well, you know, they just like, they're like, that's a little too much effort for me. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to try that next week, you know? And that's fine. Look, I get it, right? But then if I call you out on it, you can't say, oh, Jigar's mean. Like, you know, if I call you out on it, you're like, well, you know, like he just called me out on it. Great. And then we move the ball forward. That's how life goes, right? You call people out on it, and then, you know, you can actually engage in a conversation with the school board or with the city council or with whoever the decision makers are, and you can actually move the ball forward. Because right now, you know, we are doing that. We're doing that in 50,000 cities around the country. We've got volunteers and others that are part of the Sierra Club or Greenpeace, or they're just part of the clean tech movement, or they're just a concerned mother or father and they just really want to make their community a better place. You've got Boy Scouts that are interested. There's all sorts of people who are involved in the sustainability movement now, and they're making lives of other people just a little bit more uncomfortable.
So, well, and I want to ask about that because, you know, we were talking earlier about the trade conversation and what's going on in other countries. And again, I don't think that you can get mad about this conversation. You said earlier, you know, the U.S. is the leader. Our innovations for these issues, the answers to these issues are created here in the U.S. But we can't get mad when we let them leave and we let them go overseas for manufacturing and we talk about exporting. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know that you've done some work and talked about this, especially in the solar industry, about how trade's affecting the clean energy,
Absolutely.
companies.
So last year, $250 billion of deployment capital was put into the deployment of sustainable energy, right? And the renewable fuels, electricity mostly, and then some other areas as well, in agriculture and other places. And so that's starting to look really sexy to a lot of people. So there's a lot of folks around the world saying, how do I get in on this action? I want to be able to manufacture these components locally. I want to deploy them locally. I want to do all these things. And the U.S., ever since Jimmy Carter was president and Ronald Reagan was president, decided it didn't want an industrial strategy. And I don't think we need to compare ourselves to China. I think we need to compare ourselves to Canada or Germany. Both countries that have wage rates that are roughly the same as ours. They've got pension rates and all the other things that we have. They've got union issues. They've got environmental regulations which are similar to ours. But they've decided that for a select group of manufacturing companies, generally things that are more automated, so that labor costs are not the big determinant, but it's actually more about a technology thing, which solar fully complies with. Solar is very automated, such that we're now down to less than 2 jobs per megawatt of manufacturing capacity. And so you're now in a situation where you have to decide whether you want to attract those jobs here. One way to do it is to blame the Chinese, which is what we've done.
Right.
So we've decided to have a trade case. There was one German guy who decided that he had a factory in Oregon and that he was going to bring a trade case because the trade process in the U.S. is a judicial process. If you have a certain market share in the U.S., you can bring it forward without any politician's help. You just have to petition them. If you get enough of the manufacturers involved, in this case, he by himself could do it, then you can move it forward. Now, what have we gained from it? So out of this process, which took a year, 97% of all of the jobs in the solar industry globally are in the non-manufacturing of solar cells part of it, right? They're in the design, installation, manufacturing of inverters and structures, permitting, finance, all that stuff, right? So only 3% of the jobs are actually in the solar cell manufacturing space that this guy brought a trade case on. He basically created chaos across the entire chain, because you can imagine if a solar panel becomes more expensive, then a customer may not do a solar system and all these people lose their job, right? That's how this thing works. They only get paid if a customer actually decides to put solar on their roof. Right. Now, we were able to successfully fight so that instead of getting 250% tariffs, there were only 25% tariffs, and we were successfully able to make sure that those tariffs didn't extend to full modules but only to cells. So now you can bring in modules from India, Taiwan, other places, and there's only a slight premium, about 10% more expensive than it could have been if he would have gotten his way. So we won that battle. But ultimately, even after he won this battle of getting tariffs on the Chinese modules, he's still looking to lay everybody off in Oregon. And he said, well, that's not enough. We need subsidies from the federal government. We need this, we need that, we need all these other things. And so my response was, well, why would you throw the entire industry into chaos? And now the Chinese have retaliated by putting preliminary tariffs on all of our equipment manufacturers of silicon and silicon manufacturers in this country, as well as Europe and other places. So why would you want to create a global trade war on something that we all want, to deploy more of in the future to save, us from climate change, and and not even win? That's the thing. I mean, it's not like manufacturing of solar is popping up all over the U.S. now that we've won this trade case here around, like putting tariffs on Chinese product. Right. And so that's my thing, is maybe it's because of my Midwest values, but I think if you're going to pick a fight, you should actually pick a fight you want to win.
That you want to win and that you might have a good chance of winning.
Yeah. And so, he basically lost, but, went down swinging, I guess.
Yeah.
Talking also about back on subsidies, Clinton today, I think former President Clinton is in Chicago talking to the wind industry about Congress reenacting the PTC. How does that fall into the discussion? Are you pro PTC, or could the wind industry survive on its own Or would something else have to happen, like the oil and gas industry saying, okay, we're going to cut our subsidies and then help level the playing field? Like, what should happen in that, in your opinion?
That's a good question. You know, there's no black and white answer. I think there's a lot of people who want to say, well, the PTC is great, and as long as oil and gas and coal have subsidies, the PTC should exist. Right. And I get it, right? But the challenge is that people have to really recognize what's best for our industry, not what's best for, you know, the argument that you have at the pub after work, right? And and so our industry, the solar industry, you know, really is now saying we need to get rid of our subsidies by 2017 so that we can access enormous amounts of capital, because, you know, these tax credits are actually holding us back in terms of the type of capital we can get. The wind industry has the exact same issue. There's only about $5 billion of capital per year that's chasing tax credits, right? And so that same pool of capital is being fought over by the wind industry, the solar industry, biomass, geothermal, you know, all these people, right? And the wind industry is the 800-pound gorilla, right? I mean, they're using a couple $1 billion worth of tax credits per year. And if they keep growing, they're going to use even more, right? And so they're going to crowd out some other folks. Now, the real question is, how does wind really get built? Why did Xcel Energy in Colorado build so many wind farms, including this one that they just pushed in this year? The way that they did it was through a renewable portfolio standard, right? Xcel Energy didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, we're going to do a bunch of wind. They said, oh, you know, the legislature the voters in 2004, but then the legislature in 2007, 2008, improved the renewable portfolio standard that forces Xcel to buy wind power. That's why they signed those contracts. And Xcel pushed this one under the wire because they wanted it cheap while the production tax credit was still there. Now, Xcel has signed contracts at around 3 cents a kilowatt hour for this wind power, which is way cheaper than natural gas, even with natural gas prices where they are. If the PTC goes away, Xcel would have to sign a contract at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Do I think that Xcel is going to go out of business at 5 cents a kilowatt hour? No. So I think that they can actually make that happen. But look, I think that they should extend the PTC. I think it would be good. But the fact of the matter is the wind industry has not thought about what its long-term plan is. Because of this PTC battle, the wind industry finally has said something publicly about maybe we should phase out our PTC and learn to live without it, right? And so if that good came out of all of this chaos, that's a good thing. Because I think they were ready to keep it going until 2050. Right. And now they're thinking, oh, how do we survive without the PTC? Luckily, the solar industry is thinking about that now already and thinking about how do we live without it by 2017. But I do think that, you know, there's no right and wrong answer here. It's about how does the industry best get supported? And I think the wind industry gets best supported through increasing and improving the renewable portfolio standards at the state level. I don't think the PTC is the reason they're successful.
And then if we keep increasing the renewable portfolio standard at state level, are we going to run into, because we already actually are starting to run into in many states, like New Mexico in particular, transmission capacity issues? And then so you run into the issue of we don't really have the policies in place to promote transmission development. And so then in my mind, I fall back to what if we start building more around local loads and go towards more distributed generation and microgrid type applications, as opposed to developing these large wind farms in the middle of, like in New Mexico, there's like one little line that goes down the eastern side of New Mexico in the middle of nowhere, great wind, but to get that to Albuquerque where its biggest load is and then up to Four Corners and out, that's a big issue.
Yeah, look, I think that in this country, we've decided that big projects are difficult to do.
Yeah.
Right? Transmission lines are difficult to do. You're crossing some wealthy guy's ranch. He doesn't want it to go through. Whatever the reason is, big things are hard to do, right? So now the question becomes, does that hurt us? Right? When you look at the data shows that if we actually build new transmission over old transmission, new coal over old coal, new natural gas over old natural gas, we're going to double our electricity rates in this country because everything's gotten way more expensive today than it was 50 years ago when we built it. So local power, though, has gotten really cheap. Putting solar on your roof's really cheap. Putting geothermal in your backyard's really cheap. Putting a lot of these local things, even burning natural gas as cogeneration in a building where they can actually use the heat as well, is gotten really cheap. Now, the problem is that these two groups are not the same groups. Like the American Gas Association, like they give lip service to distributed generation using natural gas, but through their actions, it appears to me that they hate distributed generation. They're not really helping people do stuff locally. The utility company like Xcel Energy has these ridiculous standby charges, which is set exactly at the point where distributed generation doesn't make sense for somebody who wants to do natural gas cogeneration. Very convenient, I think. And these kinds of things exist. And so my sense is that, look, do I think that we should run the entire country with big transmission lines and wind power all from the Dakotas? Okay, maybe. But I do think that it's a lot smarter to do local power where people use it. I just do. I think people care enough about their community that I think they want to see their electricity generated locally. I don't think a place like, Denver wants to send all of this money out of the city, creating jobs 500 miles away when it could be creating jobs locally. And the technology is at a point now where you can actually cost effectively generate power locally in very smart, environmentally friendly ways. And so I think that what you're going to find is all of these friction points in the system, including transmission siting, is going to cause people to look at local power. And so I think that's, silver lining maybe.
Well, Jigar, we have talked, about all of these different things here in this last hour, and I know that you have a relatively new organization called Energist Ventures, which is $1 billion fund that invests in clean energy via growth capital and project financing. Can you talk about some of the key factors and the key issues going on in financing right now around clean technology solution or clean solutions? Sure.
I think that today there's a number of family offices and other high net worth individuals who understand that solar and wind are good investments. But I think that there are a lot of other investments that are similar to solar and wind in their characteristics that are being overlooked. And the hope of Energist Ventures is that we can actually raise the money necessary to help those folks join solar and wind in the tier one, sort of technologies that most major commercial banks and insurance companies look at. For instance, there's a company called Bright Farms which has signed produce purchase agreements with grocery stores to sell them produce from greenhouses in their own community. When you have iceberg lettuce, romaine lettuce, tomatoes, things that are very water-heavy vegetables, in some cases, 70% of the cost that you're paying for those vegetables are transportation costs. So even if it costs you double to grow it locally, it's still cheaper because of the lower transportation cost to grow it locally. Right? And now you've got jobs for people locally that are farming jobs. There's a lot of people who like to work with their hands, but in Philadelphia, there might not be a lot of farms. Well, now you've created farming jobs locally where people who want to work with their hands and work in the farming trades can actually do that. And you're selling produce at a 15 to 20% discount to the grocery stores, which for these grocery store chains, they make 3% margins, right? And so for them, getting 15% cheaper produce is a lot of money in their pockets. But when you talk to a bank says, oh gosh, this is very confusing for me. I don't know if I want to do this stuff. Produce purchase agreement, greenhouses, even though you and I both know that greenhouses have been around for God knows how long, right? And so we're investing in the first few projects for these guys in Minnesota and in Philadelphia. The rate of returns are fantastic. You're now supporting these types of models. And once they take off and they develop a track record of 1 or 2 years of production where they're very profitable, the banks will come on board and say, oh, okay, maybe I overlooked this too easily. Maybe I'll look at this again. Maybe some high net worth families will say, well, I didn't think I had the expertise to evaluate the first project, but I'll do the third project. And so that's the goal of Energist, is to say, there's all these overlooked technologies that, again, have been around for 20 years, but may not have been used in this purpose in a way that people, feel comfortable with yet. Water-saving technologies, for instance. There's a lot of places in water districts where they go from a high-pressure pipe to a low-pressure pipe for your residential community so that water doesn't come squirting out of your faucet at too high a speed. That energy from high pressure to low pressure is just wasted today. They've created a new pressure valve that reclaims that energy back by spinning a turbine and claiming it back, and it generates power at like 6 cents a kilowatt hour.
That's awesome.
Right?
That is awesome.
And that's fantastic, right? But no water district that I know of will ever spend money on it because they think that their money is better spent on taking arsenic out of the water or whatever. So you need a third-party investor like us to come in. So I think there are many opportunities like that, and that's how we're going to get at the largest wealth creation opportunity in our country.
And how do you...
Jigar, you know, we're running out of time, and hopefully we'll have you back soon, but where can listeners learn more about the work that you're doing and check out the work that's out there from you? Well,
Energist has a great website, so you can go to Energist, which starts with an INERJYS.com, and they're fantastic. And then I'm also affiliated with a nonprofit called the Carbon War Room, which just came out with a great report on heavy trucks, and you can go to carbonwarroom.com.
So Energist.com, that's INERJYS.com, or thecarbonwarroom.com. Jigar, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It has been so much fun talking to you. Kelly, great show again.
Yeah, another great show. And also, you can follow Jigar on Twitter at Jigar Shah DC.
Okay. And again, Jigar Shah DC. Kelly, where can we find work from Rapid Tech Transit?
RapidTechTransit.com, or you can follow me on Twitter, KKDLT.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for being with us, and have a great weekend.